VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. In just a few days, we'll be exactly at 3.5 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. Last Friday, President Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska, to discuss ending this war. Then on Monday, President Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, along with a delegation of leaders from Europe, all in an attempt to bring bilateral meetings between Putin and Zelenskyy in an effort to bring about peace. Well, our guest today indicates there was a notable absence Friday in Anchorage of a key individual who greenlit this conflict, notably the Chinese Communist Emperor Xi Jinping. So what does he have to do with this conflict, and will peace between these nations come about? With analysis of these unfolding developments, we welcome back Frank Gaffney, who is president of the Institute for the American Future, president and CEO of Save the Persecuted Christians, vice chairman for Committee on the Present Danger, China. He's also speaker in the Secure Freedom Minute. He acted as an assistant secretary of defense in the Reagan Pentagon. He's author of several books, including The Indictment, Prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and Friends for Crimes Against America, China, and the World, Sharia, The Threat to America Abridged, Guilty Knowledge, What the U.S. Government Knows About the Vulnerability of the Electric Grid but Refuses to Fix, and additional titles as well. Frank, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is a delight, always. Jim, thank you for having me back.
So you have warned that Putin's invasion of Ukraine was just not some rogue act that happened, but Russia is being used by China and part of China's plan to reorder this world. So if you would, just give us a backstory to how this conflict developed.
Thank you, Jim, for the question, because it invites a perspective on what's going on here that I think is sorely lacking elsewhere. The history of this particular time is, I guess, importantly, to be found starting in Beijing in February of 2022. Vladimir Putin, the dictator of Russia, traveled there to meet with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, and they announced on the occasion that a no-limits partnership had been formed, one that they claimed would change the world. And shortly thereafter, about 2 weeks after the Olympic Games that were the putative reason for them getting together were completed, the Russian military invaded Ukraine. I believe, as you've suggested, that at the minimum, if this wasn't Xi Jinping's idea, admittedly, you can be clear that the Chinese would have been parroting or at least approving, greenlighting the Russians' ambition to take parts of Crimea, parts of Ukraine in addition to Crimea. But they would certainly, I believe, have expected that they would benefit from doing so if the Russians were to invade. And that's translated. It turns out, of course, that this wasn't a splendid little war that was over in a couple of days. It's dragged on and on, as you said, now some 3+ years. But what the Chinese have gotten out of it has been enormous quantities of cut-rate fuel. They've gotten arms sales, for which I'm told they've been paid in gold or their own currency, yuan. And they have created, and this is really the key point in all of this, they've created chaos. Chaos that has distracted us tremendously, has depleted our financial resources as well as our military arsenal. and thereby, I think, contributed to the opportunities for the Chinese to act aggressively in their own environs, the Pacific specifically. And I think the same, actually, Jim, can be said about the Middle East as well. Shortly before Iran and its proxies began combat operations against Israel, specifically with respect to the October 7th invasion of it in 2023, the Iranian leadership and Palestinian leaders, or what passes for them, also made a pilgrimage to Beijing. And it seems were similarly told, go for it. Interestingly enough, just another data point, there's a little bit of talk at the moment, we might get into this if you wish to get to it later, but Nicolas Maduro, the communist who runs, or has run Venezuela into the ground, more accurately, made a similar trip to Beijing and came back from it saying he was going to invade Guyana, a neighbor of Venezuela. He hasn't done that yet, but he's threatening to do it. And I think the pattern here is unmistakable. This is all about creating conditions under which China is likely to be less hindered by the United States should it decide, or let me put it differently, when it decides that it is going to act against Taiwan or the Philippines or maybe Japan, Guam, who knows, even us here at home.
You have actually used the term, Frank, World War Xi. Tell us what you mean by that. Is this what you're talking about, this creating this chaos around the world?
It is exactly what I'm talking about. You know, people have described one or more of these episodes as, you know, evidence of World War III. Mm-hmm. But I think if you understand the individual who probably has done more than any other to bring about these conditions of war worldwide, it is Xi Jinping, hence World War Xi.
So do you believe countries then in this world, whether it be that of Ukraine or Russia in this case, or Iran, that even the United States are just being moved around as pawns on the board by China?
Well, there's a Chinese game called Go, as you probably know, that involves precisely this kind of activity where you're moving your pieces to try to gain advantage over your adversary and force them into, defeat, basically. So I think this is very much in keeping with that kind of tradition and training to be playing your pieces against adversaries to their detriment and your benefit. And so I don't know if puppet is exactly the right word for it, but I think they certainly are pieces on the board to be moved around to the liking and the benefit of Xi Jinping and this Chinese Communist Party.
You know, when this all broke out 3.5 years ago, many thought it was not going to be that long. And certainly when we crossed the 1 year mark, many people thought it would be done by that point. Then 2 years, then 3 years, now 3.5. What's your perspective on this, Frank? Is China really the ones keeping this war going?
They're definitely keeping it going. As I say, that if it weren't for Chinese infusions of cash, the Putin regime would surely have been unable to continue the war effort. Maybe it had fallen. And whether that was in the form of these payments for oil and gas, or whether it's in the form of, the arms that have been sold to the Russians, or other kinds of support. There's some who believe, I think I'm among them, that the Chinese probably arranged for North Korean troops to be brought in to fight for the Russians against the Ukrainians. Some even say there may be Chinese troops on the ground as well. So all of this is, I think, invaluable to Putin, and it has cemented his role as the inferior partner in this so-called no limits partnership. And that means, as some have said, Russia is in the process of being really colonized by China.
Friends, we're speaking today with Frank Gaffney, former Assistant Secretary of Defense under the Reagan administration of the Pentagon there. So we have last Friday, the summit in Anchorage, President Putin confirmed that Russia would not have invaded Ukraine if President Trump had been president at that time. Comment on that, if you would.
I think that's probably true. I don't know whether he said it because it's true or he wanted to just sort of suck up to Donald Trump, honestly. But it seems unlikely, given that he and his friends did not engage in belligerent acts during Trump's time in office the first time around. Mm-hmm. But it's evidence of, I think, what I've discussed elsewhere with you. Peace through strength does work. I think Donald Trump practiced it during his first term, and he's trying to get back to it now. But to do so, he's set on trying to end this war and a few others, as a matter of fact, as well.
Yeah, and multiple wars. And as a matter of fact, I think Hillary Clinton even made remark that if he indeed does bring about peace, that she won't nominate Donald Trump for Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, it seems improbable, doesn't
right.
it? But it was a nice quip.
I'd like to look at China here for just a bit, as China seems to be a key player in so many of these world conflicts, and China's had a desire to reorder the world. What does a reordered world look like through the eyes of China?
First and foremost, it involves the elimination of the United States as the impediment to what it believes is its rightful place in the world, which is the dominant power, the Middle Kingdom, as they used to call it during the Imperial Chinese times, the center of the universe as well. And they couldn't be more clear about this. It may sound incredible to those who are not following the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda outlets, but even Daily Times in English makes it very clear that they see us as their main enemy, and our elimination is absolutely essential to the realization of China's legitimate ambitions. And they're hard at it. And they, in fact, we might talk about this a bit more if you care to in the course of the interview, but the unrestricted warfare, which is the term they've given to everything short of, explosive, kinetic kinds of war. That hasn't happened yet, thank God, but it may be in the offing. But including biological warfare, by the way, COVID-19 comes to mind. They were set on using these instruments against us.
We're going to pick up with this topic of the reordered world under Communist China because, friends, this is so key to what we see happening, not only in this situation, but in other world conflicts as well. Frank Gaffney is with us today, president of the Institute for the American Future. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, did the animals that we see fossilized today live millions and millions of years ago?
Chris, according to evolution, they did, but I question that. First, note that most of the fossils are nearly identical to modern-day organisms. There are clams in the fossil record, and there are clams today. Maybe a little bit different, but still clams. Theologically, if the fossils died long ago, then what does that do to the biblical teaching that things were very good in the beginning? Did things die and experience pain before man, before God called things very good? No, in the beginning there was no death. It was Adam's sin which brought the wages of sin, which is death. If death existed before sin, then death is not the penalty for sin, and Christ's death paid no penalty. Chris, recent creation is absolutely essential, even to the salvation doctrine. As we go back to Genesis, we can get it right.
This is Chris O'Brien. Thanks for going back to Genesis.
This is Crosstalk on the VCY American Network. Frank Gaffney is with us today, not only Vice President, or Vice Chair, I should say, for the Committee on the Present Danger, China, but also President of the Institute for the American Future, President and CEO of Save the Persecuted Christians, and, Speaker on the Secure Freedom Minute and Secure Freedom broadcast as well. Served in the Reagan administration, Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon, and comes with a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of analysis as to what's going on with world affairs. And really, we see the hub of so much of this conflict. All the spokes, going back to that hub, Frank, that appears to be communist China.
I believe that's the case, Jim, and to conclude otherwise is to ignore an awful lot of evidence that supports the conclusion. And if I may just plug the work of our Committee on the Present Danger China, one of the things that we've been doing for the past 2 years or so is a series of weekly webinars in which we've examined various ways in which this strategy of so-called unrestricted warfare has been executed against this country. It's all available, by the way, for free at presentdangerchina.org. There's a subscription option there that's also for free, but it allows you to monitor these things. And the cumulative effect of just this comprehensive depiction of what they're doing is they're deadly serious about defeating us, and they will use absolutely every means at their disposal to do it. And that probably includes something they haven't done to date, but they're capable of executing at will now, which is the old-fashioned kind of warfare, the shooting kind.
Yeah, wow. Again, friends, that website is presentdangerchina.org, and there's weekly webinars available, tons of information available that delves into these many issues pertaining to communist China. And Frank, before the break, we were looking at just what this reordered world looks like through the eyes of communist China. And you mentioned the number one was eliminating of the U.S. as a dominant power. We've got to. U.S. cannot be that superpower. We cannot have the domination any longer. Talked about unrestricted warfare. What happens after that? Where does China see its place then coming into replace that role of where the United States is?
Oh, for sure. That's the idea, is that it will revert to what it considers to be its rightful place in the world. But as to your question about what comes next for us, it's a very, very troubling question, because the answer to it appears to be nothing short of our destruction. In fact, one of the things that we've talked about on several occasions in this webinar series is a statement made about 22 or 3 years ago, I guess now, by a man who at the time was the defense minister of China. His name was General Chi Hao-chen. And he told a closed meeting of party cadre in China that Deng Xiaoping, who back in the early 1990s was the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, the top dog, the man who, by the way, ordered the massacre at Tiananmen Square. And he said that two things that are interesting, particularly. One, that around that time, 1992, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was over. The Soviets had lost. A new Cold War, he said, was beginning between the United States and China China would win. And he also issued a directive to the biological warfare program of the Chinese Communist Party, an illegal biological warfare program, by the way, under its treaty obligations. And its order was to prepare for the depopulation of the United States so that it could be colonized by communist China.
Wow.
So I don't think this is, a sort of abstract proposition. I think they're very specifically seeking to take us out as a population as well as a nation.
Well, hence we've seen things like land grabs here across, the buying up of key land here, and not so accidentally near military bases here. And we know that there are efforts being made in Washington right now as well to stop the allowing of land to be purchased by communist China here in these United States. But there are many subtle ways that they are making inroads, whether it's through the theft of technology and patents and so forth, whether it be that of the buying up of farmland and even growing crops to send back to communist China or near sensitive installations here across this country. This is all going on as we speak.
It is going on, and it is actually accelerating in larger places in this country. And that's what's so staggering is, this is being done not only under our noses, but they've, made no secret of it, really. In some cases, a bit more than others. But the cumulative effect of it is unmistakable. It is deliberate, and we are by and large ignoring it.
Yeah.
I believe our great peril.
Friends, let me just, on this note, we're going to talk about what happened in Alaska and so forth with analysis there, but there was just a press release that went out from Wisconsin Congressman Tom Tiffany from Washington, D.C., and he has just introduced legislation called the Protecting Our Farms and Homes from China Act. He points out that roughly 265,000 acres of farmland are owned by communist China, and allowing them to buy up our land puts American national security at risk and also hurts American farmers and hurts property owners. And so he has introduced, again, it's called the Protecting Our Farms and Homes from China Act. And Frank, he's saying it's time to put an end to CCP-owned farmland and homes here in the United States.
Well, I couldn't agree more, except to say it's past time.
Yeah.
The idea that we've allowed this to go on as long as we have, as you know, Jim, I think you alluded to it. It's not just buying farmland.
Right.
It's buying the facilities and factories in which that farmland's products are turned into food that we consume, among others. They obviously are taking a lot of it back to China, but and then on top of that, there's the problem that several folks, Chinese nationals, were caught bringing into our country, biological, vermin, I guess one might call them, that are capable of destroying our crops. Mm-hmm. So you could conceivably see, them plundering what they can and destroying what they can't.
Yeah,
either way, it's a food catastrophe for this country.
You control the food supply, you control the people. Let's talk about what happened in Anchorage. I'm going to play a brief clip here. This is Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. I was on CNBC yesterday, and this is what he had to say. Let's listen in.
That there will likely be a bilateral meeting, and then perhaps one that includes President Trump. Is that where things stand right now?
Well, Joe, let's go all the way back to Friday, because I want to set the record straight on what went on in Alaska. Alaska was a show of force by President Trump. He invited President Putin to land that the Russians used to own. He displayed a huge amount of military hardware and then did a flyover. It was kind of like inviting your uncontrollable neighbor to your house and showing him your gun case. So then the President Zelenskyy, we had a very good meeting with him and his team in the Oval for about an hour and a half. And then we met with the European leaders. It was an incredible group to have in the White House, all led by President Trump. And yes, the culmination of that was a call with President Putin. And my strong belief is that there will be a bilateral meeting between President Putin and President Zelenskyy. And that's the only way to end this conflict, is to get the two sides talking.
Okay, so we'll unfold what happened Monday of this week, but was this meeting in Alaska, do you agree with him? This was a show of U.S. strength?
I think that this is a case where the flyover, for example, had a certain impressive value in terms of, evincing our strength. Mm-hmm. And also the cheeky way in which the president welcomed Putin with it. Mm-hmm. But having said that, I'm not sure that the overall takeaway from Putin, on Putin's part rather, from the meeting was that we were being as strong as one would like. I think his sense, it seems, is that he can continue, as the president put it, to tap along Donald Trump. And some of the, repercussions that the president had made clear would be forthcoming if he did that, didn't, eventuate. So I think that probably Putin believes he's still very much in the driver's seat on this, and witness what he's doing, in the immediate aftermath of it, and it seems just about every single night, to continue raining down death and destruction in Ukraine, even as nominally he's supposedly interested in some sort of peace with that country.
So we'll get to Monday here in a moment, but what should be our takeaway from what happened in Alaska, in Anchorage, with President Putin?
Well, my feeling about the takeaway is that we are continuing to see, first of all, as we discussed at length earlier, a very selective view of what's going on here. And I think, I call Xi Jinping a strategic arsonist, Jim, as you know, and I think as long as the arsonist is still at large, the idea that you're actually going to put any of these fires out in any enduring way, especially, is very dubious. But I think what is also quite unsettling is that it appears that the president signaled a willingness to put some kind of security guarantees in place. That was very evident, of course, with the Europeans, but we were told by his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, that he had done it with Putin as well. Now, I'm sorry to say that Witkoff seems to get things wrong, and this one may be another example of that, but Putin, I don't think, is accepting of that. So as far as I can tell, we're still pretty much at square one on this process.
We'll be back, friends, in 1 minute. Frank Gaffney is with us today, formerly served in the Reagan Pentagon, also vice chairman for Committee on the Present Danger China. Website, presentdangerchina.org, presentdangerchina.org. They are holding weekly webinars warning about communist China. We'll be back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
No matter what issues you experience in life, you will find help in the book of Psalms. The Psalms bring comfort to a hurting heart.
The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want.
As read by Brad Canterbury, VCY America is offering an audio CD, a complete reading of the book of Psalms, bringing hope in times of discouragement.
Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted within me? Hope in God.
The Psalms provide direction for daily living.
Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path.
Good for yourself and to share with others. This 5-CD set is available for a donation of $20 by calling 1-800-729-9829. 1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Frank Gaffney, our guest today, as he has had a number of roles, not only serving in government, but also in a number of different meaningful areas of service to our country. Yeah, the Vice President for a Committee on the Present Danger of China, President of the Institute for the American Future, President and CEO of Save the Persecuted Christians. All of these have links one to another, all connected, related issues, but certainly warning us today about China's role in the Russia-Ukraine war. And again, we're going to talk about Monday, what transpired, but what we're talking about here today is China's involvement. Is peace attainable between Russia and Ukraine without acknowledging China's involvement in all of this?
Well, it's not so much acknowledging it. I think that is important for starters, obviously, but it's prevailing upon them to stop underwriting Putin's war machine. And interestingly enough, as we've discussed on previous occasions, Jim, unfortunately, we are underwriting the Chinese, who are in turn underwriting
good
the Russians. It's just crazy making. But one of the things that's misbegotten about our policy towards China is we have been turning a blind eye, basically, to Wall Street moving trillions of dollars from our capital markets, including the pension funds and investment portfolios of people listening to this show, I'm reasonably sure, to China, including into actually Chinese military companies, no less. So all of that is something that needs to be rectified because, as I said earlier, I think if the Chinese were unable or at least chose to stop putting money in the pockets of Putin and his friends and to stop arming them, this war would come to a conclusion in fairly short order.
Are we heading that direction, Frank, with some of the policies that President Trump has put into place, whether it be that of becoming more self-sufficient as a nation, self-dependent, not on others, but just keeping things, clear at home with whether it be that of valuable minerals to that of having energy sources, be self-sufficient in those, self-sufficient in food supply, self-sufficient in pharmaceuticals, which we're getting from China. Think about that one. Are we heading in that right direction? Or are we moving at too much of a snail's pace in all of this?
It's such an important question, Jim. We are moving in the right direction, I think, across a pretty broad front, but it is painfully slow. And partly that's because I think that it just takes time to reverse strategic errors of the first order, namely, essentially going out of the manufacturing business and becoming more and more dependent upon Chinese sources of, rare earth minerals and a whole host of other things, including pharmaceuticals, as you say. So I'm encouraged by the general thrust of what the president and his team are trying to do in this regard, but we do have to pick up the pace and recognize that literally at any moment the Chinese could cut us off with possibly devastating effects.
Let's talk about Monday. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy came to the White House, and I guess he dressed up a little bit more this time. Also, a number of world leaders. Give us your assessment, Frank, of what took place, and whether or not you carry a spirit of optimism. Well,
my optimism is tempered, shall we say. I think that what we saw on Monday was an impressive show of support, solidarity, in the persons of all of these European leaders for Zelenskyy of Ukraine. But on the other hand, to the extent that in the end this comes down to a question of will there be security guarantees for Ukraine that can give it some comfort if it agrees to cede territory to the Russians, that they won't be back at their throats again in short order. And I don't think the Europeans are in a position to do much in the way of meaningful security guarantees. They may pay lip service to the idea. They certainly want us to be part of it. But I think, again, this goes back to having neglected these threats for so long. And it's not just us that's done it, it's the Europeans as well. To the contrary, not only have they not been preparing for conflict with the Russians, they've been increasingly, with few exceptions, relying on energy resources from Russia themselves. So it's not just us, but they're doing it as well. Mm-hmm. And that has given Putin not only leverage on them, but I think confidence that he can get away with exercising it.
Friends, our phone number to Crosstalk today is 800-733-9829. If you have a question for our guest today, Frank Gaffney, question on our topic or a brief comment, 800-733-9829. What do those security guarantees look like? And it's really a question mark in many people's minds because President Trump has said, well, it's not boots on the ground. What kind of guarantees are we discussing?
That is a very interesting proposition, and I don't think anybody's being terribly specific about it. It's been described in some settings as something kind of like Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which, reduced to its essence, says, if any of us get attacked, all of us will come to the aid of the targeted party. That's not something that can be, I believe, counted on, let alone, prove as a deterrent to a guy like Putin in the absence of the capabilities to back it up. And as I say, the Europeans simply don't have those capabilities. We have some, and I think the president has been to this point at least, mostly reluctant to contemplate having them dedicated for this purpose. A lot of people, excuse me, a lot of people in his MAGA base are wildly upset about that idea, and he's kind of backed and filled on it. So I don't think we've got clarity on what those guarantees would look like, other than, in the abstract, trying to be discouraging of a further act of aggression by Putin.
Friends, our phone number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. Let's begin with Veronica calling from Arizona. And Veronica, you're on the air.
Yeah, my question, thank you so much, is about who really started this war. Because I do believe that Obama interfered in 2014. He sent Victoria Nuland, our diplomat, to interfere in democratic election of Ukraine, and which later led to globalists being involved in this region, and also, brought Zelenskyy in. Zelenskyy murdered his own people. I have family from Ukraine. I know for a fact that he marked and murdered his own people. Why is nobody talking about what Zelenskyy evil is doing? Why is the media not reporting on this, and how we can hold these people like Obama accountable for starting the war? Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Any comment there, Frank?
Well, there's some interesting thoughts there. I would say that you're right to point out that this first act of aggression by Vladimir Putin was back in 2014 on Obama's watch, and he got away with it essentially with impunity, which undoubtedly made him confident that he could do it again. Maybe not on Donald Trump's watch, but certainly on Joe Biden's. And I'm no, unalloyed fan of Vladimir Zelenskyy. I think there's a lot of aspects of his tenure that have been very problematic. But the amount of killing that has been done by the Russians, and of the Russians for that matter, has marked this conflict as something, really the continent of Europe certainly has not seen since World War II, if not World War I. It's at a scale and with a cost that is almost unimaginable.
Thank you for your call. Let's go to Jason in Uppsala, Minnesota. You're on the air.
Yeah, in regards to China, you're talking about unrestricted warfare and how many of our American politicians have been compromised by China. Certainly the Biden administration was. I'm from Minnesota. Our Governor Walz is showing all the signs of being compromised or has a long history going back to China. It just seems like some of these guys need to be exposed more. Governor Walz is making signals he might be running for president again. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
Thank you for the call. How deep is this infiltration, Frank?
Well, I've written a book about it. I think you mentioned it in your introduction, called The Indictment, Prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and Friends for Crimes Against America, China, and the World. The friends are people, well, like Tim Walz, people like I mentioned on Wall Street, people in the Congress, people in academia, people in Hollywood. I mean, the media. It's a phenomenon the Chinese describe as elite capture, and it's a part of the unrestricted warfare that they've waged very successfully against us to co-opt or recruit or otherwise compromise individuals, and there was no more egregious example of the phenomenon. I mean, Tim Walz is a beauty, but you're right about that. But he pales by comparison to Joe Biden, who, was literally taking millions of dollars from known, members of Chinese intelligence. And how that could possibly have been tolerated is almost inconceivable, but it was. People ignored it. People lied about it. People lied about his son Hunter and his laptop and all the rest of it. But it doesn't change the fact that he was, as one of our colleagues, Sam Faddis, has said, former undercover operative for the CIA, by the way, he would be known in the lexicon of that trade as a controlled asset of the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Very troubling, folks. Let's go to Julie in Racine, Wisconsin. You're on the air, Julie.
Yes, you said that, the Wall Street was taking all of, the pension money and lots of investments and giving it to China. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, and is there any reading material that I might be able to reference about that?
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that question. There's abundant information about this. I don't think I said, and I certainly don't mean to say, that all of that money has been going from, pension funds and so on. But a substantial chunk has. By some estimates, it's between $2 and maybe even $6 trillion.
Tell you what, let's pick up with this right after the break. Frank Gaffney with us here. Thank you for the call, and we'll give further answer. Again, presentdangerchina.org, presentdangerchina.org, the website. And Frank did serve as Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Reagan Pentagon. We'll be back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. I'm studying through the book of Revelation right now, and I'm in Revelation chapter 19. There we see John talking about an angel standing in the sun, calling for the birds. They fly in the midst of heaven to come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that they may eat of the flesh of kings and captains and mighty men, the flesh of horses. What is this? The end of the battle of Armageddon. The Lord God has killed all of these, 100 million to 200 million, and the blood has gotten up to the height of the bridle of the horse. That's a lot of dead bodies and carcasses. How many birds live in that area? Well, I went and researched it, and wouldn't you know, I found a website. Palestinian Wildlife Society says that more than 500 million birds pass over the Middle East twice a year in the autumn and spring migration. This is a brand new report. 500 million? Just another sign, I think, the Bible's ready to be fulfilled.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America, and today's topic with Frank Gaffney, China's role in the Russia-Ukraine war. And a caller had phoned in just before the break asking about the Wall Street money going into this, and are there resources out there that can help further educate us? We can learn more about what's going on with this. And Frank, the break interrupted us there, but go ahead and continue your thought, if you would.
Sure. I did want to just emphasize that it's part of these funds. I was saying, as we came to the conclusion there, between 2 and 5, maybe even $6 trillion, we believe, has gone into Chinese hands from Wall Street's managed funds. Some of it, as I said, into the People's Liberation Army itself through companies that work for it. There's a lot of information on this. My colleague Roger Robinson has been a particularly important contributor to it. Maria Bartiromo has done 2 wonderful specials on underwriting the enemy, a third one about space, by the way. You can find that at Fox Nation. Our Committee on the Present Danger site, again, is presentdangerchina.org. We've done myriad webinars on this subject and other writings. And also the Coalition for a Prosperous America is a great resource as well. I think it's prosperousamerica.org, if I'm not mistaken. And finally, the Prague Security Studies Institute has a brand new report about how this is working, in particular in connection with the Chinese buildup in space.
Yeah.
So, all good resources. Prague Security, PSSI.org, I think it is.
Friends, you're not going to get this from legacy media. So, I mean, these are alternative sites and information, ways to get this information. David in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, has been holding the longest. David, you're on the air.
Yeah, appreciate all of you. And we need to know, if we can, what is the role of the globalists with the Chinese and the Russians? Are the globalists using them as like a agent to bring us down?
This is a fantastic question. Thank you for asking it. I'm sorry we're just about out of time, but I'll make the point quickly. I consider what we're up against at the moment as a totalitarian trifecta. Yes, the short answer to your question is the globalists, the World Economic Forum, now headed up by Larry Fink, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and their sponsors, are thick as thieves with the Chinese Communist Party and its various sort of vassal states like Russia. But they're also joined at the hip at the moment, this may sound incredible, with what I describe as adherence to Islam's Sharia doctrine, Sharia supremacists. It's been called the red-green axis between the communists and the Islamists. I've also added the blue for the globalists. Those have very different end states in mind. The Chinese think they'll rule the world, as we talked about. The globalists think there'll be a new world government, that they'll run the elites. And finally, the Sharia supremacists think there'll be a global caliphate, that they will run the world according to Sharia. But what they all believe they need to do first is get rid of us.
Yeah.
And they're making common cause towards that end.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for the call. Rod is next, Wisconsin Rapids. You're on the air.
Mm-hmm. Good afternoon. This is Rod. You may have answered my question already or answered my comment. It always goes back to the old adage, follow the money. Given the corruption of the Ukrainian leadership and also the United States, there's a lot of money to be made for this war to be going on. So some of them may be hesitant to draw this to a conclusion before they can make all the money they can on it. If you could comment on that, that'd be great.
Thank you, Rod.
Yeah, as I said, I don't fancy Zelenskyy all that much, in part because I do think that he's been involved in a lot of corrupt practices, and I think he's had help from Americans as well, including quite probably Joe Biden, who also took money from Ukrainians, by the way, in addition to Chinese. Let me just say, I think that at this point, I believe that increasingly, in particular, the people of Ukraine are very anxious to have this war end, at least get a ceasefire, if not bring the whole thing to a conclusion. But I think the impediments to that happening are less people making money on the war in Ukraine, or for that matter, in European capitals or here, then, as I said before, is I think it is in the interest of the Chinese to keep the chaotic, destabilizing, the arson, if you will, going.
Let's go to Bob in Northeast Maryland. Bob, you're on the air.
So, Frank, you're really showing how partisan you are on that. So a few questions for you is that I know that we're talking about the other administration starting the war in Russia, and we go back to the Biden, we go back to the Obama, but let's not kid each other. Trump has been in office now for 6 months. He has absolutely no pull over this whatsoever. So thinking that this war would not have started with Trump in office is just not correct. And I think deep down inside you know it's not correct. And as far as China is concerned, you absolutely know that Democratic politicians are not the only one in bed with China.
Okay, tell you what, thank you, Bob. We're down to 60 seconds. I want to give Frank time to respond to you. I know you've got more to say, but Frank, go ahead with the charges here by Bob.
Yeah, to be very clear, I think there's blame enough to go around. My sense of it is that Putin would not have attacked Ukraine, but he was certainly getting encouragement to do that under Xi with the Biden team in place. And as to the second point, look, the biggest problem we've got, in my estimation, is China. And you're right, there are Republicans who've been dirty on China, not as many. There are Democrats that have been dirty on it. We've got to clean up the captured elite. That's says the book, The Indictment.
It's impacted both sides of the aisle. Thank you, Bob, for the call here. We're out of time. Others, we apologize that we don't have time more for your calls and comments. Let me give you Frank's website here again, presentdangerchina.org, presentdangerchina.org. And Frank, thank you for carving out the hour to join our listeners today for some very important information.
It is a privilege and an honor. I always enjoy doing it. Thank you for having me, Jim.
Again, Frank Gaffney with us today, formerly served in the Reagan administration and vice chair for Committee on the Present Danger. God bless you, friends. Thanks so much for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.